welcome to We Have Ways of Making You Talk with me, Al Murray, and James Holland, and our Battle of Britain series, Tennis Leader Out.
Get yourselves one of those microphones.
Incredibly convincing.
Boys and girls.
Incredibly convincing. Yeah, I think everyone should have one. So in terms of preparation for this big Adler Angriff, the clash of the Eagles that's going to come, there's two major areas of preparation for the RAF. First is the air defence system. And the second is processing enough pilots and aircraft. And in this episode, we're going to look at both those things for the RAF. And we're also going to see what the Luftwaffe is doing on the other side of the channel as well. So the system, it's important because it's the world's first RDF. And you've told me off many times about this.
It's not radar. It's not radar. Radar is an American acronym that comes in later in the war. It's anachronistic to call it radar. It is radio direction finding. It's a direct product of science fiction, this, because there's people writing all sorts of crazy things between the wars about what future technology will offer. Because radio, after all, is brand new. Radio is at this point is newer than the internet is to us, right? We've had the internet a couple of decades now. Radio is literally just being created and discovered, and its potential. The government doesn't want there to be a BBC because they want to use radio for themselves, for military purposes, all this sort of thing. So there's this great sort of science fiction-y thing around radio and radio waves. But what this results in is the director of the Scientific Research Department of the Air Ministry, a fellow called Harold Wimpress, has a committee.
Which is also funny. He's the sort of person you expect to be a scientific civil servant.
Absolutely. And he sets up a committee under the physicist Henry Tizard to investigate the possibilities offered by science for air defence. And they do consider the possibility of the death ray. I just think
now look here, Watson Watt. We've heard about there's this chap here who's claiming he's created a death ray. What do you think of that? Well, I think that's probably unlikely. Robert Watson Watt says what? He says, well, I do think there is a way of using radio wave reflections to detect rather than destroy aircraft. And he puts forward these theories on detection and location of aircraft by radio methods to the Tizard Committee.
This is right on the edge of what technology is capable. Yeah, absolutely cutting edge. And he says that, you send out a shortwave radio pulse, it bounces back, you catch that, you measure how long that takes, you measure you triangulate with more than one station, you can figure out where something is, how fast it's moving, roughly how high it is, and all this stuff. And because it's these
and you can track this on a cathode ray tube.
A television screen, in fact, which is, and obviously when they test it, they use a BBC, shortwave radio transmission because the BBC is brand new. It has an aerial, because they need an aerial. Mm-hmm. And a pilot from RAF Hayford, once they've got the money, in February of 1935, a pilot from RAF Hayford flies along a railway line to a point 20 miles away, and then he comes back again. They catch him, they track him, and the guy running this, in charge of all of this, overseeing this, is Hugh Dowding, who is an RAF through and through fellow who's clearly, he's looking at the science. We've got to remember the RAF at this point is 17 years old in 1935. It's looking for a role in peacetime. They've had success with dealing with colonial policing using aircraft. There's all the talk of bombers, but this is the RAF beginning to get whiff of what can we do about the bombers?
So if the bomber's always going to get through, how do you make sure that it doesn't get through?
Yeah. What can you do about that?
You look at science, which is why Dowding at the time is Air Marshal and is the man at the Air Ministry in charge of research and development. There's lots of people coming out with wacky ideas, whether it be death rays or whatever. And you can't just sort of throw lots of money at all sorts of things. So this pilot flying from RAF Hayford near Daventry to do this first test is basically to see whether it is worth backing. And when it works, that's when the money is forthcoming. And so Robert Watson Watt, who's invented it, is told to set himself up on the Suffolk coast at a place called Bordsey. And within 6 months, he can detect aircraft 40 miles out to sea.
Amazing.
So then 5 RDF stations are ordered. And by 1936, aircraft are being detected 62 miles away. So this is getting better and better and better. And there's lots of snags and it takes time and Dowding's getting impatient and why can't we get this all sorted out quicker? But an RDF training school is set up at Bawdsey in early 1937 and Bawdsey opens operationally in May that year as well. And so suddenly you've got the Dover chain home following in July 1937 and then Canewdon in August. So suddenly you've got 3 chains on what has become chain home, and fighter command exercises can start that month. Yeah, in late August 1937.
Yeah, getting out there, testing it, seeing how it works, reacting to things, the whole thing. Because this is all about directing the fighters to the bombers before the bombers get to wherever they're going. It's the important thing is to strike them before the bombs land. If you're defending. If you're defending England, that's what you've got to do. And if you're thinking of a radar rather than RDF, then you're probably thinking of something, maybe sort of a bubble, or maybe a thing spinning round and round and round and round. It's none of that. It's sort of pylons with cables strung between them, sending out this shortwave.
Well, they're 360 foot high.
I know. Yeah. It's extraordinary. These great big masts with antenna wires and then receiving masts that catch the reflected signal. They don't work over land, which is a bit of a drawback. As we might see.
Well, they work in the direction in which they're pointing. They work in an arc in front of them.
So you're pointing them out to sea.
So if you put them on the coast and you point them out to sea, then that's the arc. There's a sort of concentric ring around where they're going to. So it's like a beam, isn't it? It's like a beam of light. And
you've got enough overlapping. It means that when an aircraft is sending echoes to 3 or 4 of these stations, you can actually figure out exactly where it is, and how fast it's going. Really, really quite simply. Then the second one, which is a chain home low, which is to cover the possibility of aircraft flying in low under the main chain home transmissions. It's more like a searchlight. But basically, this means by the autumn of 1939, you've got chain home and chain home low in place, which is incredible.
Well, and the interesting thing is that chain home low has a shorter range, but it's actually more detailed. It's more accurate. So actually, together they work pretty well because chain home, the big tall masts, they can do their kind of 120 miles or whatever, and then chain home low picks them up as they're closing to the towards the coast and offers a bit more detail, really. And one of the very good reasons why you don't really want to be going to war in 1938, should anything go wrong, because your air defence system might not be up and running at that point.
This is all part of Chamberlain's Fortress Britain build-up, is that you make Britain impregnable. As a deterrent to the Germans. By the summer, Dowding's really pushed hard to make sure that this gets done and that red tape gets cut, and he's really like a dog with a bone about this. There is a system basically in place in the nick of time, right?
Well, yeah, but this is the point. The war has begun and they're still honing this. They're still kind of creating more radar stations, RDF stations, sorry. They're still creating more RDF stations. But the other point is that by the 3rd week of June, when the strategic earthquake happens and France is surrendering, it hasn't really been tested. And radar, RDF, radio direction finding, is only one part of the cog in this complex system. So we should talk about the other parts that make the system, because it's not just radar detection alone, RDF detection alone. So key to this is the filter room.
Which is, it's very interesting that everything in the whole of chain home and the whole of chain home goes to one place. One single facility at Bentley Priory in northwest London near Stanmore.
Which is the headquarters of Fighter Command.
Yeah, which is actually their HQ. And they've got a great big map table. Like in the movies, right? And a dais, coloured rings spreading out from each of the radar, the RDF chains. Oh, you made me do it now, Jim. You made me say radar. Each of the RDF chains, and each station is given a different number. And that way, as the enemy aircraft approach, they can plot them with the rings. They update the info continually. They range cut, as it's called, where what they do is they triangulate and on the basis of the information as they're getting it, the height, the speed, the expected number of the size of the formation.
And all the different radar chains, RDF chains, have a different colour. So Bawdsey is red, Dover is blue or whatever it might be. I haven't got that right. But you see these concentric rings strike out and they all cross over and interconnect like a big Venn diagram, don't they?
Yeah. And it means that you can plot the bombers before it gets through. But then there's the next stage, because as we said, this only looks out to sea. You've got the high tech, the ultimate high tech of the RDF, chain home, chain low, and home low. And then you've got the Mark 1 eyeball, basically, in the form of the observer corps, which is people looking at the planes, looking at the aircraft, taking with a sort of theodolite, with a kind of, think like a sextant, taking a bearing. They call it a pantograph, don't they? Which marks on a chart exactly where these aircraft are. And every single one of these observer corps stations has been properly actually surveyed and marked. So they know exactly where it is. And they're roughly kind of every 5 miles. And it means that you can, by sight, track the aircraft as they come in. It's an extraordinary system, isn't it?
It really is. And by beginning of July 1940, there's 1,000 observer corps posts and 30,000 observers. They're all volunteers. They trained in the evenings, even though they'd been mobilised, obviously, on the 24th of August 1939. And from then on, they're expected to mount 24-hour manning of the post. But they do come under the direct control of the Air Ministry, and pay has been introduced. But apart from tin hats, they don't have any uniform, not until 1941, when actually that's when they finally become the Royal Observer Corps. 1940, they are just the Observer Corps. And each are divided into groups. So each group has a number of posts with concentric rings around the post. Each part of the sky is covered by more than one post.
Yeah.
And each post is given a letter and a number. Each post has its own little hut with a telephone, pair of binoculars, tea-making facilities, obviously, really important, and this pantograph, this theodolite thing that you were talking about. Yeah. And in fact, where I live, just outside Salisbury, in our little village, there is the remains of the Observer Corps hut where that was established. So they're literally everywhere.
And everyone's seen the image of it. Is someone with a binos with a tin hat on in these civvies, surrounded by sandbags, in a dug-in position normally.
Yeah.
And then someone looking through the pantograph, taking the bearing on the aircraft, and they get the elevation. And then they get the eyes on and try and count the number of aircraft. It's sort of as simple as that. And it is left over from the First World War, from the Zeppelin attacks. And, and it's used in a kind of ain't broke, don't fix it way. But that information is also sent on to the filter room. So that's added to the information that they're gathering, right?
Yeah. So each post sends its information to its group centre. So the Observer Corps group, which is then forwarded to the operations rooms both at Bentley Priory, the command, the headquarters of Fighter Command, the group headquarters, such as 11 Group, 12 Group, 10 Group, 13 Group, and the sector stations. The Observer Corps can manage over 1 million different reports in a 24-hour period. And it's updated all the time. I mean, absolutely, that's the point. Amazing. But obviously, there has to be a place where this information is collated. So you've got the information from the RDF chain going to the filter room. The filter room then passes that out to the operations room. And the key thing about the operations room is these are standardized, and you would have operations rooms at Fighter Command headquarters at Bentley Priory. You also have them at group level headquarters and at sector level. So Fighter Command divides the landmass of Great Britain into groups. So there's 11 Group, which we've talked about before, which is South East England and London. There's 12 Group, which is Central England, think Mercia. There's 10 Group, which is South West England, think Wessex. And then 13 Group is the Northern England and Scotland. Then these groups are then divided into sectors. So each sector would have a main sector station, which would be at a large airfield. These airfields then have satellite airfields. So each sector station has an operations room, just as the group headquarters has a operations room, and just as Bentley Priory has an operations room. And they're all based on the absolute same design. So there is a dais, a sort of, a raised platform on which the controller sits with his fellow controllers. There's a large map table below and a tote board on the wall opposite. And it's called a tote board because it looks like one of those betting boards that they have at the races. And it's a visual map of the sky from which a huge amount of information can be seen at a glance. That's the point. So plots of enemy and friendly aircraft are moved onto the map, on the map table. On the wall opposite, on the tote board, is the squadron readiness with coloured lights for each section, blue, red, yellow and green. And then the plots are moved by plotters. These are usually WAFs, so female members of the RAF, known rather misogynistically as the beauty chorus.
The controllers, once they've decided what they're going to do with the aircraft they've got, they speak directly to the pilots, and the pilots speak directly to each other using radio telegraphy. The different squadrons can't speak to one another, so that means, the controller can speak to everyone.
Controller can speak to the squadrons in his sector.
Yes, that's right. But it means, so what you have is this extraordinary system that is centralized and devolved at the same time. There is extraordinary redundancy built into this and flexibility. And of course, for every control room, there is a substitute control room for if anything goes wrong. You have this redundancy, centralized yet devolved information system for vectoring planes onto the bombers, to vectoring planes onto the Germans. And that's how it works.
And it's really, really clever because the pilots have the radio, which enables them to listen to the ground controllers. But there's also further networks of antennae radio receivers on the ground picking up transmissions from the pilot. So cables run from these antennae to the operations rooms, where on yet another cathode ray tube, we really need lots of those, the direction of the transmission can be picked up. So with the receivers at the center of the screen, a line would then light up from the transmissions from the pilot, which would then indicate what bearing he was on.
So basically, the idea is, once you know where the bombers are and if they change course, you can carry on vectoring your fighters, because you know where your fighters are, onto that bomber force or onto the enemy aircraft.
It really is a sort of incredibly huge amount of information that you can just see at a glance. And the great point about it is, it doesn't matter where you are, it's all the same.
Yeah.
That's the point.
Yeah. And the language is standardized.
Scramble.
Sounds exactly the same.
Scramble, orbit, vector 231, 230, angels, bandits, snappers.
These are all words and phrases devised to be broadcast
through not necessarily brilliant RT, isn't it, Jim?
Well, apart from 3, you don't have a TH anywhere. That's the point. You know, you don't have words that could be mistaken for something else.
Another transmitter in all RAF aircraft that gives off a thing that like a radar reflector that basically, well, when they come on the RDF, it's obvious they're an RAF aircraft. This is all absolutely 100% cutting edge technology.
As soon as the RDF chain is starting to be in place, you know, Bordsey in 1937 and Dover and all the rest of it, you know, they're thinking, cracky, okay, well, there's no point in having this information coming if we can't then get it out beyond the RDF chain. So we're going to have to phone it through. So that requires lots of telephone cable to these pretty remote places. So huge amounts of telephone cable are laid, again, with plenty of redundancy as well. Everything then goes through the Stanmore Exchange, which is at the bottom of the hill beneath Bentley Priory. But they also have a backup exchange. Take note of this, Heathrow Airport, at Bushley Exchange as well. So, you know, and that's not all either, is it, Al? Because they also have the Defence Teleprinter Network, the DTN, which is exactly what it says, it's a teleprinter. And that links and serves all 3 RAF commands, but is also maintained by the GPO. So, you know, they've dotted their I's and crossed their T's.
And there's also anti-aircraft command with 1,204 heavy and 581 light anti-aircraft guns, which isn't the complement they're meant to have. And there's barrage balloons. There's the Admiralty also has its eyes on all of this stuff. But basically, what you have is this system which has great flexibility built into it. The flexibility comes from the standardization. I think what's really interesting about it, it may all look the same, but that's exactly the point, because then anyone can work anywhere in the system. So if a station's knocked out, you can bring in personnel from somewhere else, replace them instantly. And anyway, there's a reserve ops room as well. So the whole point is it's completely interchangeable, completely flexible, but it's untested is the truth at the start of July 1940.
Yes. This is brand spanking new technology. No one has ever developed an air defense system. It is the world's first fully functioning air defense system. There was nothing like this over Poland, nothing like this over Scandinavia, the Low Countries, or in France, which is why the Luftwaffe have got a bit cocky, to put it mildly. And this is why, when Gunter Rahl from JG52 was flying over Dover and was suddenly being attacked by 501 and 64 Squadron, he couldn't understand where they came from. That's because he's never come up against an air defense system before.
In the next part, we will look at the other elements that go into the British air defense system: the aircraft repair, aircraft production, pilot training, because there are so many cogs in this incredible machine that we can't squeeze them all into one part. We'll see in a moment. Welcome back to We Have Ways That Make You Talk with me, Al Murray, and James Holland. And for the sharp-eared amongst you who aren't watching this in our new video format will notice that the sound has changed slightly for part 2. And those of you watching will have realised we've
done a rent-a-ghost. We've held our nose and blinked, and
exactly.
now
we've
Goalhanger
operated
Towers.
elsewhere. We've looked at the Dowding system and the complexity of it, but also the sort of forethought that's gone into it. There's stuff and there's systems, but none of this will work without pilots, right?
All planes.
Or planes.
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
Exactly.
So processing of pilots is quite a thing. And, the bottom line is you can only train so many. You can certainly only train so many in a Northern European country.
Yeah.
Which is the same for both sides, but of course the Luftwaffe have started earlier.
Yep.
So that's the problem. It's weather dependent. When the weather comes in, which
Yeah.
it does tend to, and as everyone knows, winters weren't great at that time of our history. That restricts what you can do. And training takes about 9 months.
The training is incredibly intense.
Yep.
It's lengthy and also quite failable.
Yeah.
And that people are falling by the wayside the whole time. So not only is this very, very time consuming, but it's people consuming because you have people coming in to the RAF who then don't make the grade.
Well, they don't make the grade, and they also kill themselves.
Well, and people killing themselves.
So they
obviously.
doubly don't make the grade.
But this emphasises the sort of the danger at the core of it, as well as also of the 100 people you may have on the first parade to fly. You're whittling down to half that number probably by the time they're getting into single engine fighter planes on squadrons.
So how it works is you do your initial training wing, you do initial training, that's square mashing and all the rest of it, and a bit of book, learning stuff in the classroom. Then you do, and then you do your first flights and all the rest of it. Then you do secondary training. Then you finally get your wings if you're good enough, and lots of people don't.
Yeah,
and this is your point. And if you have survived that long, and that includes sort of, unbelievably terrifying kind of night flights and things.
Yeah.
Then you go to your operational training unit, where you would then be converted onto Spitfires or Hurricanes. That moment, that they are single engine, single pilot aircraft, and it's a leap of faith. And, and then it's like, off you go. You're going from a sort of 400 horsepower aircraft to 1100.
Yeah.
It's quite a big leap.
Yeah.
And you've got to take off in it, fly it around, stooge about for a bit, and then land. Shortage of pilots, this most precious of all commodities, is a problem.
Yeah.
And it's particularly a problem because they've lost about 300 of them in France.
Yeah. And then having enough airframes is also obviously really, really important.
Yes.
Because I mean, we've touched on it really there. The pilots are the thing that is truly irreplaceable. Airframes, though, if you can keep the production numbers up, if you can keep the churn going, you're probably going to be all right.
Yeah.
If you can keep the attrition rate under control. So
Yes.
this is the balancing act that's really, really important. And one of the interesting things is lots of the fruits of the Chamberlain government's efforts are coming into play by the time the Battle of Britain comes around. Obviously, they're not built with the Battle of Britain as it's then fought in mind, but it's shadow factories.
Yes.
It's boosting production. I mean, it's the fact is it's buying the fighters in the first place, stimulating industry by.
Well, yes, and it's also Vickers Aviation buying out Supermarine.
Yeah.
That's all happened beforehand. So you've got a bigger conglomeration, bigger enterprise
Yeah.
controlling it. I mean, the naysayers that say, it wasn't anything to do with Lord Beaverbrook. It was all to do with Lord Swinton who came before and all the rest of it. That just isn't true. I mean, it is true that Swinton plays a huge part in all this.
Yeah.
But the person who really kickstarts massive production is unquestionably Lord Beaverbrook, who is appointed to the head of the new Ministry of Aircraft Production, which is brand new, hasn't been created before, because aircraft production has been in the hands of the Air Ministry up until this point. Comes into being on the 17th of May. This is a big thing.
He's an astonishing appointment, though, in terms of who he is. I mean, people don't know who Beaverbrook is. Beaverbrook is a Canadian
Press baron.
Pal of Churchill.
He's a pal of Churchill. He's a businessman. And Churchill wants to have he wants the people running the war effort to be a bunch of technocrats and his cronies. So it's not entirely democratic, perhaps, but it's a very sensible approach. I mean, the other thing I'd say about Lord Swinton is Lord Swinton and the Air Ministry before them have also built up huge supplies of aluminium and steel and perspex and all the rest of it. So they've got a lot of the stuff in place. The big thing that Max Beaverbrook does is that he turbocharges the aircraft production.
Yeah.
So everything's in place, but what it needs is rocket fuel to go in and just go, okay, we've got all the tools, now we just need to make it happen.
Yeah.
That's what he provides, this incredible scale of energy. He also immediately says, right, you forget any other type, we're going to produce 5 types, everything else can just be mothballed for the time being, which has long-term consequences for, say, the Lancaster and 4-engine heavy bombers and the Mosquito and all the rest of it. But it's about, what do we need to do now? We need to streamline this.
But it's quite interesting though, because there's a fundamental difference here between, say, Germany and Britain at this point. Is he can say that, but what will actually happen in Britain is a load of people go, well, we've been told to pause this type, but you know what? We'll just keep trickling on. 'Cause the jet engine is one of the things where he says stop on that. Whereas in Germany, this sort of thing, say the sort of dive bomber, insistence on dive bombers, is an actual impediment to types and development.
And progress.
And progress in a way that it isn't quite in Britain. Because one of those societies is freer than the other. And so people are going, yeah. Don't worry, boss. We're on it. And actually de Havilland carry on developing the Mosquito.
Well, because it's made it absolutely clear that this is a temporary measure. Yeah. This is right now. Doesn't mean to say you're not going to need it in the future. Yeah. But it's really interesting. He doesn't like committees. He doesn't like FAF at all. He is not at home to Mr. and Mrs. FAF in any way whatsoever. Yeah. So he has signs in his office saying committees take the punch out of war and organisation is the enemy of improvisation. Both of which, incidentally, by the way, I completely adhere to myself. I totally agree with it. Red tape is cut. Bottlenecks are cut. So rather than sort of sending a letter, which was the traditional way, forget that. He just gets on the telephone. If it can't be sorted out by the telephone, he sends one of the MAP people in the Ministry of Aircraft Production down to hand sort it out and kick butt. And he expects incredibly long hours. This is not a concession to workers' rights by any stretch of the imagination. People are working literally 24/7. He also sacks Lord Nuffield, who might have been very adept at running the Morris Motor Corporation, but is absolutely useless at running aircraft production. Yeah. So he sends Sir Richard Ferry of Ferry Aircraft Company to the new Spitfire factory at Castle Bromwich to see why, after 2 years of it being in operation, literally nothing is coming out at all. And Ferry finds that mismanagement is rife, that people are slack, that they haven't got the right machine tools. The whole thing's just a complete shower. So Vickers immediately takes over the entire operation at Beaverbrook's insistence, and things start to improve really quickly. Yeah. He also speaks to Beaverbrook and to Keith Park every single night.
Really?
Rings him up. And Dowding, and says, what do you need? How's it all going? But the big thing he does is he turns around the systems and the ways of operating to speed up production as much as possible.
So he makes what's in place work.
What is in place has been set up by Lord Swinton and by others, and that's why they deserve the credit they deserve. But as I say, the man who puts kind of rocket fuel into this process is Beaverbrook. And in the first week, of him being in charge, there's 130 new types of all aircraft, and by the last week of May, that's 280.
Yeah.
Yes, that's more than double. Yeah. But in June alone, 446 new fighters are built. In July, that figure is 496.
And these are being built properly. They're not corners being cut here.
No. It's just more efficient.
You'd expect that to be a measure in this kind of time of crisis. That someone somewhere would have made sure this happened. I think the really interesting thing he does is the civilian repair organisation.
Completely.
I think that's the thing which is next order in terms of how do we actually organise this. And this is Beaverbrook overhauling it. It's already in place, but him saying, no, we need to sort this out.
Well, he takes it from the Air Ministry.
Yeah.
And the transformation is incredible.
But again, the contrast with the Germans here, German damage types have to go back to Germany.
Well, because they've got brand new airfields. They haven't got enough kit.
Yeah, that's another example of the home advantage.
Yeah. But, by July 1940, production of new aircraft has risen by 62%. New engines by 32%, but the repaired aircraft has risen by 186%.
That's amazing.
And repaired engines by 159%. So that is just amazing.
If you've been listening to this podcast a while, you know your Hurricane from your Spitfire.
Yeah.
It's not that you're not relying on the fact that one of them might have grey and green paint and the other one's brown and green. We understand that probably that the Hurricane is clad in fabric. We understand that it's essentially the end of the biplane technology. It's a Hawker Fury without the top wing.
Yeah.
We know you know that. We know you know that.
Yeah.
But let's still perv on these planes anyway because they're fantastic.
First flight, 6th of November 1935 of the Hurricane.
Yep.
Thick wings.
Yep.
But the weaknesses are
it's slow.
Well, and also it's got a very easy stall.
very quick stall. You can't see it coming. So normally when you're about to stall, you have pre-stall buffeting.
Let's basically explain what a stall is, because I think we're talking about the stall like we know. That's the point where the plane stops flying.
Yes, it no longer has enough thrust to keep it airborne.
Well, or enough lift.
Enough lift.
Yeah, enough lift and thrust in combination to keep it going. It literally drops out the sky.
But the problem with that is that in the Hurricane is you don't get much warning. In a Spitfire, you get lots of pre-stall buffeting where it shakes. You don't get much of that. So Hurricane pilots tend to underfly it because they don't want to suddenly be caught out.
Yeah.
So yes, it has a great turning circle, but only if you absolutely cane it.
When I was a kid, people used to practice stalls kind of over where my parents.
Yeah, so we go,
and then you'd watch them sort of
and then a bit of splutter.
They'd pitch, and you'd hear the engine sputter, and they'd flop a bit, and then they'd pull out of the stall. All quite genteel in a Cessna or whatever.
But none of that in a dogfight.
No. And these are, after all, because they're fighter aircraft, for dogfighting, there's instability built into how they work.
One of the other problems is that you've got one of the good things is you've got 4 machine guns side by side and one wing, 4 machine guns in the other, and you harmonise them so that they come to a point at a certain distance.
Yeah.
The flip side of that is you've got fuel tanks at the foot of the wings, the base of the wings, and if you've already fired your guns and you get hit, the wind, as you're flying, goes into those gun ports and fans the flames up into the cockpit, which basically means you've got about 3 or 4 seconds to get out.
And you've also got an enormous fuel tank
in front of you as well.
Right in front of you. The chances of being soaked in petrol, that's not an improbable thing to happen to the pilot.
The other problem is it's got this sort of cage-like canopy, a bit like the one on the Messerschmitt 109. Makes it sort of, the visibility isn't great. The other big problem that he said that there was, it had a sort of habit of leaking oil from one of the seals around the propeller. So you could be flying along, suddenly you're just sprayed with oil on the front of the windscreen. You can't see anything. So that wasn't great either.
But we do love the Hurricane.
Love the Hurricane.
Make no mistakes. The Spitfire is the sort of...
It's brand new. It's brand spanking new.
Yeah.
It looks sexy. It is sexy. All those sort of things. First flies 5th of March 1956, of course.
Yeah.
But in the first part of the Battle of Britain, hasn't got variable pitch propeller, which changes automatically. So the angle of the blades on the propeller change as you're, it's a bit like changing gear effectively.
Yeah. And it affects how fast you can climb.
Yes, that's the big thing.
And this is all about climbing fast, because the Hurricane can climb relatively quickly for an aircraft of its time, but the Spitfire really can climb quickly.
Yes, so that's the big thing. 1,000 Spitfires and Hurricanes are converted by the 15th of August, for example.
Yeah.
So that's good, but there's no fuel injection either on the Spitfire Mark 1 or the Hurricane. If you haven't got fuel injection, that means you can't control the carburetor in the same way. So that when you suddenly dive, you create negative gravity, and that forces a fuel to the top of the float chamber in the carburetor, which then becomes flooded and very briefly cuts out, and it regains itself, but that can lose you a couple of seconds worth of diving
It's an
potential.
Extraordinary oversight in the design of the Merlin engine.
It has a tight turning circle of 696 feet, but both the Spitfire and Hurricane only have 300 rounds of ammunition.
And it's rifle caliber ammunition. This is one of the great mysteries of the Air Ministry's decision-making process is to equip its intercept fighter aircraft with such poor weaponry. It doesn't add up as a decision. In the 1920s, they've decided it's a bad idea.
1926, there was a paper saying I would not recommend this under any circumstances. It's like shooting of a pea shooter.
Maybe one of the reasons, it's certainly the reason the British Army retains 303 ammunition, is they bought so much in the First World War. Yeah. There's an awful lot of it, right?
Yeah.
There's tons of it.
I would suspect that's got a high factor in it. Make to amend. But the net result of this is it means you've then got 14.7 seconds worth of collective firing.
Yeah.
It's not each machine gun firing in turn. They're all firing together.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take long to get around through 300 rounds. And famously, 74 Squadron in the Battle of Britain fire 7,000 rounds at a Dornier 17 and still don't shoot it down. The prescribed distance of which you harmonise your guns is about 450 yards. That changes to 400, and as the battle progresses, it changes again.
And what we need to explain what that means. So you harmonising your guns is basically you angle them so that they will converge into
a cone of bullets.
So literally you've got the 4 guns across the wing, and it's about pointing them so they converge. And what happens is there's great argument about the distance at which they converge. And by the time the Battle of Britain's properly going and word's got round, that you get as close as you can, so you converge your guns as close as you can make them.
Anyway, but we should talk about the Luftwaffe, because obviously we've been it's all RAF and Fighter Command so far. They have also developed their own version of RDF Designated Telegrafia, DT.
They figured out the same thing, but the conclusions they've arrived at are quite different. So it is the
360 degree
spinning radar, like
the Würzburg.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Freya.
Because of that, they can't recognise RDF as a form of.
Well, they think it's something similar, some kind of version. They do call them DT masts.
Yeah.
So they recognise that it is a radio detection mast, but they look really rubbish. So
well, they do.
Yeah, which they do.
Now.
So they're the sort of comparatively primitive nature of Watts and Watts masts actually lull the Luftwaffe into sort of being a bit complacent about them, which is a good thing. Radar, DT, is developed by the Kriegsmarine rather than the Luftwaffe. And as we all know, they don't really talk to each other very much. So they have Würzburg and Freya on the coasts of northern France and the Low Countries, but they're not there to help the Luftwaffe in any shape or form.
They send a Zeppelin in May of 1939 to sort of snoop, and obviously the British see it coming. And so
they just send out static.
And so the Germans are mystified to an extent by, so what even is this? The Germans not keen on
radio telegraphy
at all.
No.
At this stage of the
There's no ground control at all.
Yeah.
So you take off, you can communicate in your Staffel, you might even be able to communicate in your Gruppen, your group of 3 Staffel, but you certainly can't communicate with the bombers you're supposed to escort. You're told when to form up, where to form up, and off you go. And so all those instructions are handed out before the mission takes place. So the mission has to take place according to the instructions, or else you're on your own.
Yeah.
We should just very, very briefly just explain how they're organised. So Luftwaffe is organised into Geschwader and to groups. A Geschwader, I suppose, is like an RAF group, and a group is like an RAF wing.
Within a group is 3 Staffeln, which is kind of a squadron.
Yeah, so a Geschwader has 3 Gruppen. Each Gruppen has 3 Staffel. Yeah. And yes, a Staffel is sort of like a squadron. Groups are always signalled with Roman numerals 1, 2, and 3, and Staffel with all the Arabic number. And they have air fleets, so they don't have commands. So each fleet is like an army, so it has its various component parts as fighters and bombers and Stukas and reconnaissance and so on. So it's a tactical air force. That's the bottom line. It's a tactical air force rather than a strategic air force. And just to remind people, tactical air force is one which is designed to support ground operations. A strategic air force is one which operates independently of any other unit. It's just an air.
I mean, the thing is this then means a squadron, a Staffel leader or a Gruppe leader is trying to conduct the battle. So if he gets lost, they all get lost.
Yes. And if he attacks the wrong airfield, they all attack the wrong airfield.
They all attack the wrong airfield. If he fails to meet up with the bombers he's meant to be escorting,
they
all fail to meet up with the bombers.
But it's not that there aren't people who don't understand the value of radios. There are, and it's really interesting. So there's this amazing memoir by this guy called Ulrich Steinhilber, who's a young lieutenant in JG52. And his immediate boss is Adolf Galland. And Steinhilber learns that he's supposed to be having 75 men under him, equipped and trained to operate radio stations and mounted on trucks with kind of sort of mobile radio telegraphy and all the rest of it. But he discovers actually he's only got about 20 men. They just haven't appeared. There's no one there. No one's organised. No one's ever bothered with it. He tries to encourage the group to use ground control, but makes himself thoroughly unpopular in the process. Yeah. So eventually he organised this huge, great exercise using ground observers and mobile radio teams to connect to the pilots. And watching this is General Hugo Sperler, who's one of the Luftwaffe commanders for the Battle of Britain. And in the debrief afterwards, it's hardly mentioned. And eventually Steinhilber puts his hands up and says, "What did you think of the radio communications?" Galland immediately cuts him off and goes, "Good Steinhilber, you've reminded me. You were talking far too much. You were just bothering us all the time. As I've always told you, it'd be best to throw out all of these damn radios. We don't need them." And that's that.
Well, I mean, and good. I'm speaking from a British perspective here. The crummier the Luftwaffe's effort is, the better. Right? I mean, we talked about the Spitfire and Hurricane, and we have to say ME-109 is a better plane than either of them, isn't it, Jim?
Well, it is at this point. I mean, it just is. There's no getting away from it.
I love the qualifications that we have to bring in here.
Well, we have to bring qualifications. I mean, as Tom Neal says, it could do the 3 things required of a fighter aircraft in 1940 better than any other. It could climb faster, dive faster, and pack a greater punch in the combat zone. Has poor visibility. The canopy is awful because it's like a door, so it opens up on hinges and opens up to the side. rather than pushing back and forward.
The reason it exists, or it's the reason it's the type that the Germans pick, is because of news of the Spitfire. They opt for the 109
because it's fractionally faster than the Heinkel 112, and it can climb faster than the Heinkel 112. So it does. By the time it has the Daimler-Benz 601, it's got supercharger, it's got fuel injection, it's got electrical variable pitch propeller. All of which becomes standard on any fighter plane by the end of 1940.
The plane they're flying in 1940 is the E. It's the fifth variant. They've been flying that a little bit more.
Mark 1.
Yeah, exactly. The Mark 1 Spitfire, the 1As and 1Bs that come on. But what you've actually got here is the fruits of the Spanish Civil War and Poland, and their experience with what they need to fine tune on the fighter. So that's why they're into their fifth type. At this point in the war.
And it has very high wing loading, as I said earlier on. It's got 32 pounds per square foot. So that means that the wings are much smaller.
Yeah.
That means less drag, so greater speed, But it also means a higher stalling speed.
Yeah.
But the ME-109 gets around that by having slats at the front of the wings as well as at the back.
Yeah.
Which will come out automatically at a certain speed, which means in theory it can actually outturn the Spitfire.
The really important thing is, because these fighters are neck and neck in this regard.
Yeah.
Essentially. But what we're really looking at here, though, is the armament, because we've said how both British fighters, Spitfire and Hurricane, have been equipped with pea shooters, with rifle ammunition. The Messerschmitt has a cannon that fires an exploding.
Yeah, they have different organised. Some different because there's different varieties of the ME-109E, and some have kind of one cannon and 4 machine guns.
The cannon is the point, because the round explodes on contact with its target, and that's a completely different deal to firing bullets at something.
Yeah, and also the interesting thing is that the Merlin, Rolls-Royce Merlin, is made of magnesium alloy. So if it gets hit by a cannon, that's good night Charlie to that engine. Whereas the DB601 is made out of cast iron, steel, and if a .303 hits that, it just squashes it like a pea.
A cannon round would have a greater effect.
Yeah, but you have also, the machine guns have drums of 1,000 rounds rather than 300, so they have 55 seconds worth of firing rather than 14.7 seconds of firing. That's a huge difference.
Yeah, and then there's its chunkier brother. The 110, the Zastora.
It's just Zastora.
This is a plane with flying across the North Sea and attacking Britain in mind, isn't it? As a fighter escort. It's got a tremendous range, very long legs, does 300 miles per hour. But the problem
is... Onto the gunnels.
Yeah, very, very powerful armament. But its problem is, because it's a twin-engine plane, it's not as manoeuvrable. No. It's not as quick. And
because it's big, you can't dive quicker. The great USP of the 109 is you can dive quicker than anything else. So actually, turning circles are irrelevant, because if you're suddenly being attacked by someone, you've got someone on your way, you chuck the stick forward and down you go. You're going to outrun them. So you don't need la-di-da fancy aerobatics. Yeah. But in a 110, you don't have that luxury.
The bombers that the Germans have, the Stuka, the Ju-87, which is a battlefield weapon, isn't it?
Yep.
The Stuka. It's for attacking armies, attacking bunkers, attacking columns of troops, and that sort of thing, which is used to incredible effect in France and the Netherlands, and in Poland as well, with its Lemgrate on the wing that's a siren that makes a noise to scare
Jericho trumpet,
scare the bejesus out of you. It's sort of synonymous with Blitzkrieg, that plane.
Yeah.
But the battle that's coming isn't Blitzkrieg.
You'd start a dive at around sort of 8,000 feet typically, and you do about 85% gradient. Yeah, so it's literally virtually kind of vertical. And at some point you pull out, there's air brakes, you drop your bomb. The problem with this is that as you're coming out of your dive, you're virtually stationary. You're very slow, it's got a fixed undercarriage, so it's not fast, it's not very manoeuvrable. And anyone hovering above you, you're easy meat.
Yeah.
And it's very, very difficult to be accurate. And it makes it very difficult to attack accurately if your target is moving, and B, if you have the enemy above you.
And then they're medium bombers, as although they haven't got a heavy one. So their medium bombers are their heavy bombers, as it were. The Heinkel 111 and the Dornier Do-17.
Yeah, and they're both developed in the early 1930s. I mean, this is the point. They're originally designed as civilian liners for Lufthansa, and then,
So they're slow, is the point.
Well, 220 miles an hour is absolutely tops. But the point is you don't fly maximum speed. You fly well below that. So realistically, you're flying at kind of 160, 180 miles an hour. And both of them they can only carry about a ton each.
Well, but at the time...
Lancaster can take 10.
Yeah, but the Lancaster is merely a gleam in Roy Chadwick's eye at this point. So this is the situation they're in. And the Ju-88 is the third type that the Germans have got, which is a newer, supposedly a faster bomber but has been diverted in its development with the dive bombing.
Well, yeah, they keep sort of insisting it has dive bombing potentials, and the good folk at Junkers kind of sort of teeth suck a lot and say, well, we can do that, but it's going to cost you. It's going to cost you in terms of cost, financial cost. It's going to cost you in terms of time, and it's going to cost you in terms of performance.
Yeah.
So what's a super fast kind of 300 mile an hour twin engine bomber with huge range becomes a bomber that can basically fly the same speed as a Dornier and a Heinkel, but maybe a little bit faster.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, the Luftwaffe's arsenal is therefore a very mixed bag of the flawed, the aging, and of course the brilliant.
Well, but also it's a mixed bag of aircraft suited to a completely different task. This is, in the end, the encounter in the Battle of Britain is a tactical air force tries to take on a fighter defence system. Were the Luftwaffe a strategic air force with that fighter system in mind, maybe it would have a better chance.
Yeah.
But the fact is, it isn't, and it doesn't even know that this system exists.
No, exactly. So it's starting its battle seriously disadvantaged.
And the problem is, if you're going to Hitler, you go, we have 1,171 fighters on our establishment, mein Führer, and he goes, wonderful, carry on.
Yes.
And then you go back to your headquarters and go, yeah, but we can only get 2/3 of those in the air. And this is their other problem. Yeah. It's because as the battle proceeds, there is a question of claiming and overclaiming, and everyone lying about the numbers of planes shot down. But right from the start,
but how much have we actually got?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, no one knows.
No one knows.
And as the battle proceeds, between the 3rd of August and the 28th of September, the Germans lose 719 bombers. They're combat ready with pilot strength is 700 to 800 bombers. They lose the lot.
Yeah.
And they lose 400 crew.
Yeah.
That's a serious bite out of their capability.
We've looked at Canal Camp. We've looked at phase 1 of the Battle of Britain. We've looked at the system, the two sides, what they've got, assets and pluses and minuses and all the rest of it. Now we are getting ready for Adlerangriff.
Exactly.
The attack of the Eagles.
Luftschlacht
England. Yes, exactly. This is the second phase, people, of the Battle of Britain. And that's what we're going to be looking at in episode.
So join us in our next episode of We Have Ways of Making You Talk for episode 3. Now, if you've been watching this on YouTube, of course, that was the lean, mean... when you buy that beef from Sainsbury's that's for some reason had all the fat taken out of it? Well, that was that episode. But if you want a big, juicy bolognese with all the grease of the beef running down your chin, then what you need to do is subscribe to our Patreon, and there's a full members version with all of basically all how crap the Stuka is in it. Thanks for listening. We'll see you again.
Cheerio.